Kia ora koutou, everybody, and welcome to the Solar Seminars. Very grateful today to have Professor Sandhya Samarasinghe join us to present her recent work. She is a very diverse researcher and covers all sorts of things to do with complex systems, big data, informatics, and so on. And it gives us a really interesting perspective for landscape architects because we spend a lot of time looking at big stuff. And I think today we're going to look at small stuff. Yes. Yeah. And Sandhya is someone I really appreciate as a colleague. We're kind of twins in a way because we became professors at the same time. So we've had quite a close trajectory together through at Lincoln. So without further ado, welcome Sandhya, and thank you so much for your presentation today.
Thank you, Jackie, for that introduction. And let me share the screen. Oh, okay. Thank you again, Jackie. And this is like a last minute stepping in, and I have a few days of notice, but hope it will be interesting for the wider audience. So today I'm going to talk about regeneration in biology, dynamically designed by living systems and implications for health. I kind of emphasize dynamic redesign. I thought about a landscape architecture and what you do in design as well. So it's more like a design issue that we are talking about today. So this falls into health, well-being, and spirituality that we talk about, and spirituality in terms of existential philosophy. So this work is about philosophy and computing, looking at biology in a design from a design perspective. So I'd like to acknowledge Dr. Tran Thai. He's now a scientist at Agritech. He's my research student who implemented this framework on computer. And also Professor Mike Levin, my colleague at Allen Discovery Center at Tufts University and Wyss Institute, Harvard University, USA. And he's a very prominent development biologist in the world today, one of the most prominent biologists in the world today. And he does lots of regeneration experiments, and he contacted me to work together to see how computing can look at this design problem, grand biological design problem. So because there's very little time, when Jackie asked me, so I thought I'll give this seminar that I presented last week at a conference, Artificial Life conference, and the chief editor there asked me to present this at the conference, and this journal caters to computing approaches for conceptualizing challenging life problems, life processes. But computing can explain challenging life phenomena. So, why do I do these things, and where the inspiration is coming from? Since my childhood, I have been gardening. You know, I do lots of grow vegetables and plants, and the gardening is kind of my passion. I really love it. And I grew up in the tropics, and when I do gardening, like, you know, in tropics there are so many worms in the ground. You know, when you dig the soil, you cut. You know, invariably, unfortunately, they get cut because there's so many of them. But I also noticed that they regrow and they kind of remodel. And I looked at it with so much intrigue. How do they do this? How do they know? Do they even know that they are remodeling? You know, but it's happening, and it also then it applies to me as well. As a very small child, I was thinking, you know, I don't know anything about my body and how it works, and I'm sort of inhabiting and using it. And then I thought about it, my body mind is the same. I have so many thoughts and emotions going through my body, I'm going through my mind, and I'm using them and I'm shaping them, but I had no idea where they are and how it works and so on. So it was more like a existential, that's where the existential philosophy coming in. And these kind of questions have been kind of bugging me all the time up until today. And like Einstein said, we know more, but we are confused, but we are confused at a higher level. I think as we know more, we get more confused, but at a higher level, but we also find solutions. So that's where, and the Eastern traditions have come up with some of these, some solutions to some of these existential questions. But I'm saying this here because I'm using some of these ideas in the framework we are discussing today. How that can be, these kind of existential questions can be brought into some sort of solutions. And also growing up, it was like nature was surrounding me, and I was so amazed by the diversity and beauty of these forms. And again, the question of what's going on with these, why are they and how do they work, and so on. At the same time, the deep appreciation for the nature and the interest to see them in good health and not messing with them, messing up too much. So that also brought me as nature as a place of rejuvenation, healing, and also a place of curiosity to understand. It's like a dynamic. There seems to be a dynamic equilibrium around surrounding us, and we are part of it as well. So there's ideas of interconnectedness kind of developed kind of organically, and so everything is interconnected. We are part of it, and everything sort of like move together in a larger evolutionary process. We are being, like a one being, people, plants, animals, all being sort of being pushed by some sort of these internal processes. So interconnectedness and then layered of organization of this interconnectedness and interacting layers and so on was kind of organically developed concepts from my childhood up to now. So I'm using now the complex systems to look at some of these issues. So looking at now from a regeneration and the design perspective, regeneration is an ability of an organism to maintain its form. Right? So geometric form is an amazing and complex and it's mysterious. Very little is known about it. Humans have limited ability to regenerate. For example, we regrow liver, but children have great ability. They can grow fingertips to the original shape, teeth, and some organs as well. Snails and zebrafish regenerate various paths. Hydra and planarium, platform, fully regenerate, and they are called immortal. They never die. Actually, they live about 1,500 years because the cell gets corrupted and so on. And they have become model organisms. But we can learn the fundamentals of regeneration from these systems, and we can help them reactivate regeneration in humans for trauma and injury. Because we assume most probably the mechanism is still in the body, but it can be activated if you know how. So what's going on with the geometric manipulation of this worm? If you look at this is from my colleagues' experiments. If you get this small worm about up to 2 centimeters long and 3 millimeters wide, very tiny, and if you sort of amputate and look at each part separately, and within 2 weeks, they regrow to the original shape. You can see the head and head and head. Even the tail grows a head and eyes and so on. Even the head grows a tail, and body grows a head and a tail. So it's a kind of if you look at it, it's very mysterious, very interesting, kind of a dynamic remodeling of architecture, re-architecturing, if you can call it a process. So this organism can recover from any damage. Even 1/279th of organism, I'm talking about 2 centimeter and 1/279, a tiny, tiny, tiny piece. That means even if you take a small piece from the body, tiny piece, it should regenerate. So this is more, that's why they are model organisms. So regeneration is a dynamic modeling of anatomical shape. And it's a complex mechanism that involves communication, that must involve communication between cells to maintain these complex shapes. It's a collaborative exercise. So when there's a damage, so-called stem cells, I'm sure we all know about stem cells. We have heard about it in relation to cancer and all this development. Stem cell is a progenitor of the root cells. They migrate through the whole organism to the damaged site to regenerate missing parts by stem cell division. And here what happens is stem cell makes a copy of itself and the tissue cell, and it keeps going over and over and over until that shape somehow emerges, comes into being. If you look at the stem cell movement, if it works, These are my one, but you can see the green blobs are the stem cells, and you can see they are, they move to various places, and some move very fast, and this is how they move within this organism, the green blobs. Okay. So just to give a little bit of feel for this, and so there are many unanswered questions in this process. Actually, most are unanswered. So how do cells in an organism identify the location and extent of the damage? How do they know that there's a damage, right? And how do cells know what shapes to build and when to stop? So this can be framed as a problem in collective decision making, and it actually challenges us to develop conceptual models of how cell communities reliably achieve anatomical shapes. It's like how they re-engineer the shape or re-architecture. Is that a word? Re-architecture or actually, or re-engineering the shape. So then the other question comes, right? Is the process fully emergent, arising from these activities, or is the target pattern stored somewhere? Who knows? Is it there? But the thing is, how do even a small piece know the body pattern? So that gives the kind of idea that maybe stored somewhere. How do you tiny piece know the whole thing? Whether it's a tail piece or head piece or whatever, it knows the whole pattern. So where could that be? Is it somewhere else, or is it in the body, and so on? So these are the cutting edge questions in the field, and we don't know answers to any of these. So in this work, we propose a conceptual and computational framework that offers hypothetical answers to some of these questions to design and improve regeneration systems that completely and accurately, correctly regenerate their form. So that's our task, to new form that regenerates completely perpetually. So, and it's a computation. So it's a computational, conceptual and computational. So conceptual models are of high importance for regenerative medicine. In case of injury, birth defects, there are people waiting for organ replacement. They're waiting in the line for years and years. If they can be regrown to the shape and so on, then that's a kind of a, we are at the early stages. Cancer is a kind of cell, excessive cell division. It's a different kind of morphological issue, and you can address some of those things, and birth defects and injury. If you lose limbs, can they regrow to the original shape, and so on. Then this can be used as a design strategy for self-repairing robots and synthetic living machines. So these are very early stages in development. So we propose the first conceptual framework for regeneration, and we propose some concepts. First is the regeneration is a biological computing process. So belonging to these, the main concept that living systems are information processing systems. As we know, our brain does all the computing. We know that brain makes all decisions. But here we propose not just the brain, but the whole body computes, whole body processes information. And the cell collective, therefore, like our tissues in organs and so on, they operate as an intelligent and interacting dynamical system. So why do we say these things? So this is a kind of a background or some sort of a justification for using these concepts, right? Well, let's look at first at the brain, and then how other non-neural, cells capabilities. So information processing in the brain is this, everybody kind of agrees that this happens. So we have brain, and the brain has hugely interconnected neurons, right? So what we see here is a network of neurons. And if you even further look closer into it, you can see how these neurons are interconnected. And they communicate all the time. As we learn, these neurons somehow change their shape, change their communication style, and so on. So what happens is that there's a lot of bioelectricity, like sodium, potassium, kind of iron, they move through these channels. You can see communication channels between neurons. So the bioelectricity flows through them. And each neuron, we think, each neuron tends to do something, tends to process information and then share it. We exactly don't know how they do it, but we assume, as we modelers, we kind of assume things. We assume that some of them do binary computation, like 0, 1 output. Some do linear computation, like when you have an input, it produces linear output, linearly related to the input, and they can be nonlinear, processing. That means the output is somewhat non-linearly related to the input, and so on. So through these, we do lots of things. I can't talk here without these things fluttering all the time. While we are talking, our stem cells may be moving in the body as well, to do all sorts of little damage repair, little things, not big ones. We don't know, we don't regenerate quite a lot at the moment. So anyway, these things are happening at the moment, right? So idea is that our thinking is that the neurons in the brain process information, and that's pretty much it. And now, if you look at the information processing in single cells and then in the patterns of cell colonies, what happens in there? So single cells are also complex decision makers. They do without brain, right? This is single cell, right? So I have an example of a brain. This is the brainless single cell can make complex decisions. If you look at an example, look at a single cell, one single cell doing hunting another cell and taking it, and we think we need hands for this and eyes for this, but without any of these things, it does this kind of interesting manipulation so that the cell is growing, immediately getting bigger and ingesting. And so how many decisions it has to make in this case, right? So the single cell, no brain, no eyes, no hands, just a little protrusion, right? So it is now struggling hard, and it's getting okay. It's there. So this is just to show that a lot of decision making happens within a single cell. So this is a complex decision making entity. Okay, now it's happy. Okay, it's moving on. Okay, so and there are single cell architects. This is another single organism, single cell, and this is its housing made of silica. It's called a tester. And Professor Brian Ford at Cambridge University, he does a lot of research on this and a decades of research on this. And he recently, 4 years ago, he published an article called Cellular Intelligence, Microphenomenology and the Realities of Being. And he says that the world's best potter today would be challenged to design and make pottery as exquisite as this, such beauty, such refinement in this. And these are even microscopic, you can't see them. So this is an amazingly architectural feat. And if you look at cell colonies, bacterial cells, and these are individual tiny pieces of bacteria, and they come together. And imagine, look at the shape that they form. They come together, and they do lots of interesting things together. Now that imagine the single cell, now we have so many cells together, not only forming patterns, but also making decisions like to be together, having hunt food together, survive together, avoid predators together, and so on. So many things they do as a colony, and I also like to show the shape of these cell colonies that are extremely beautiful. And nature-inspired these have inspired architecture as well. I have seen a lot of papers on this architecture based on bacterial colonies and beehives and so many other things. So there's a lot of evidence that and when they come together, you can see the little light bulb there. That means they also communicate with bioelectricity, and they say, yeah, I'm here, we get together, and so on. And they have short-range communication, they make long-range communication, and basically this cartoon shows that they kind of hold hands, they work together. So they work together, they form shapes, and they kind of make complex decisions. So we say cell colony is a collective of information processing cells that collaborate towards all sorts of goals. So now we come to that's why we hypothesize that these are living systems, living computers. So now we propose, coming back to my regeneration framework, so we propose tissues as self-regenerating living computers. That means a system that recognizes its own pattern integrity and reacts to damage for efficient restoration. There's a dynamical system of computing cells, in this case, a stem cell and tissue cell. So we started with a very simple geometry, a circle. In this geometry, there's only one dimension needed, a radius, right? If you know the radius, we know the whole pattern, right? So here we have a 3,000 tissue cells, the blue ones. 3,000 tissue cells and a stem cell in the middle. So another view here, the tissue and the stem cell. So now because stem cell regenerate those tissues, it's like a mother. So there's a mother and 3,000 children in this system, right? So how does the mother knows where her children are, and when something wrong happens, how to go there and how to remodel this whole thing. So what we propose is that two types of computation. Stem cell compute certain things, and the tissue cells computing, together they do certain other computation. So I'm going to look at it here. For the simplicity, I would say if you have 3,000 cells and your mother has the 3,000 children, how do you know where they are? So it's easier to put them into separate segments like classrooms. My 5,000 children over here, another 5,000 here, another 5,000, and so on. And then I can communicate with them. It's a little bit easier than 3,000 altogether. So this is we divided this tissue into 12 segments, and so she talks to these different segments. And then what communication does it do? We propose this entity called E. I'm going to gloss over this computing, so don't worry about that part. I just explained that we come up with the idea like entropy as a kind of measure of the existence of her children, right? What this measure is entropy. Entropy is, you must have heard that term that entropy, universe is expanding and entropy is increasing. So entropy is a measure of disorganization, right? Entropy is a disorientation or disorganization. Right? So here, idea is that if the child is so far away, distance, the communication intensity is less, right? So therefore, entropy is high. So this is the idea we are using. So we have one entity called entropy that gives us the stem cell one measure that my children are okay. If the entropy changes, one or many children have gone. That kind of idea. So that way it knows where in which region the children are gone, using the entropy. Entropy is really based on this D is the distance between the stem cell and any individual cell. So only distance is communicated to the mother all the time. So from that, it has a single measure to say, yeah, my children are okay. That kind of. And then when they are missing, it knows, okay, something is gone in that region. Then it talks to the tissue cells to say, figure out where the damage is, damage boundary, and so on. So most of the computing happens in this tissue. So first is the stem cell computation through the measure called entropy, and the other is the tissue computation. That's where 3,000 tissue cells communicate. However, they communicate limited amount, but it's a network of computing cells that communicate to identify damage. For the benefit of computing audience, it's an auto-associative neural network. Auto-associative means they're interacting. Neural network, because these are computing like in the brain, is a kind of neurons, right? So I'm using only 4 cells just to say, but there are 3,000. No, imagine 3,000 cells, but they only communicate locally. That's how we achieve a lot of minimize the computation involved in this model. So there are 2 types of cells: interior cells that in the tissue, and those are border cells in the surrounding tissue, right? At the periphery, there are border cells, and then everything else interior cells. So interior cells have 4 neighbors. So I'm showing those computation with 4 neighbors. But if it's a border cell, it has only 3 neighbors. So this basically shows that if interiors have 4 neighbors, if all the 4 neighbors are present, and this goes into this computation in this middle cell, it receives information, these 4 neighbors, and the information goes in, then process happen. It makes a binary decision, 0 or 1. If all 4 neighbors are present, it says 1. Yeah, it's good. If at least 1 neighbor is missing, it says 0. Therefore, something is wrong, right? That kind of idea. So here, this example is saying that for this interior cell, if 1, 1, 1 means all 4 neighbors are present, I'm saying 1. But if at least 1 of them are missing, I'm 0. This part is the output of the neuron. So that way, if there's a damage, for example, this red part is the damage, this is gone. And from these concepts, all the surrounding neurons, so the cells, would have an output of 0 because they have at least one neighbor missing. Therefore, it can find this as the boundary of the damage, right? So that way, the cell collectively finds out where the damage is. So now the stem cell has to do is to go there and repair it only the stem cell can repair it, but it shows the tissue cells, this is the area that damage is, and they find out what the border is, and the stem cell goes there. So this basically says the interior cells would say 1 if all the form are there, if the border cells says 1 if all its 3 neighbors are there. So that's basically the neighborhood rules. So neighborhood rules will become the property of the tissue. Entropy becomes the property of the stem cell. So computer people always put things in this kind of diagram. So we have now autonomous tissue self-regeneration computer. So so this is basically a kind of from a high level perspective, I have captured those 2 things I talked about. One is the stem cells doing some sort of global sensing, monitor the state of her children, it detects a larger damaged region, and then it calls the tissue now, right? The tissue cells are called, and they detect the specific damage location through limited local interactions, figuring out who is missing their neighbors, and then the stem cell goes there and regenerate to the complete shape. So I'll talk about shapes in a minute as well. So this is the system now. Now this is like a living computer now, representing living computer because it's representing the living computations within the cells. So here's an example we did with this system. Now we have, as we know, we have 24 segments in the circular tissue, and we removed 5 cells from each of those segments, right? And see how the computation works. So in here, the entropy versus the 24 segments. The blue line is the entropy before damage. It's all equal because all the 12 segments are equal. But when you have 5 cells damage in every segment, you can see entropy has changed, So that way, it's very sensitive. The entropy is a very sensitive measure that we have used. So that way, stem cell knows which segment has received damage. In this case, all segments have received damage. But if you have something like this, where only 2 segments got a big damage, here's the green line shows the entropy change, but only the few segments, 5, 6, 7, have received damage, and the entropy shows that, and that only few, like 5, 6. These segments. So stem cell knows exactly where the damage is, so it can invoke the tissue cell to find the damaged border so that it can go there. Right? So here's an example that our computer, our model works. So taking that big one damage as here, stem cell is here. It finds the damaged region. So it only invokes tissue cell in this region, not all these ones. They can stay quiet. You don't have to worry about it, right? So it's very efficient in that sense. So it says then it goes there and slowly regenerates and gets the shape. Because it knows the border cells has certain rules. We have to have 3 cells. Therefore, it can completely cover that area without worrying about where is my pattern. Pattern is already in the tissue. So advantage of this is that it recovers from many small and most large damages. I didn't talk about the past model. Very limited past models available, and they show limited regeneration capacity. Sorry, I'm having a drink of water. They show very limited regeneration capacity involving huge amount of computation, like thousands and thousands and millions of computation between information passing between cells. But here we are very, very small amount of computation and achieving much larger effect. However, there's one limitation. It fails to recover from total damage to the periphery. For example, if the whole outer region is gone, it cannot do anything because it doesn't know where the boundary extends. So that's the biggest problem here. So we realize that damaged tissue must retain the pattern geometry within the damaged segment, damaged tissue for the regeneration to be complete. Otherwise, it cannot do these big damages. That means we found that at least one string of cells from the center to the periphery must be there anywhere to get the radius. Otherwise, then it can be learned from there. So as long as the string remains, it can do it, but otherwise it cannot. However, the small animal, we know it does this, right? So it does. It doesn't need out a string. It doesn't matter anywhere. So anyway, this work was published in not the one that I showed earlier, but it's the one before that. It was published in AI 2018 conference proceedings. So in the paper that I showed at the beginning was an extension of this idea to a much larger capacities. So again, here we address the issue of not being able to regenerate the outer without the outer periphery, right? So what did you do? You need to do something to make it more capable. So now we are talking about self-repair circular tissue computer with pattern memory. So we have to introduce pattern memory because we know otherwise we can't do it. All this much, the total outer damage. So this is the circular tissues as before, the border cells and the interior cells. We talk about the neighborhood rules, and these are part of the tissue cell. Now we introduce a information field. We propose the existence of a cellular memory space, an information field from which pattern information can be accessed from anywhere in the organism. That's a bigger stretch. Now I talk about thoughts and emotions. In our system, our bodies, we don't know where they are, but they seem to have huge impact on us. So similarly, we are thinking about maybe there's a field, where when the bioelectricity flows through an organism, there are a lot of fields around it, bioelectric fields, magnetic fields, all sorts of things, which have no idea what information they contain. Maybe there's a pattern memory. So we took a stretch. It's a big stretch, but it's kind of a slowly gaining acceptance. So we introduce a memory field, information field. So how does then the pattern information be? It can be accessed from this field, but who would inform the field about the pattern? That's again an existential issue, because if the embryo develops into a full form, where is the pattern? Does the fertilized egg know the limbs and a number of fingers and so on? Does the fertilized egg know that? So that kind of question. But this issue, regeneration, is that form is already organized, pattern is there. Can it be, reorganized, remodeled after damage? So anyway, here we assume that the system is already there. We don't go to the very fundamental existential question of where the pattern comes from in the first place, but we think about the pattern is already there, it's damaged. So therefore, we say that stem cell extract the tissue plan, minimum pattern information from its communication with the tissue cells. Okay. Oh, people are there. Tissue cells and retain it in its information field. That means it talks to the children all the time. So from that it can extract the radius, for example, and keep it in the field. But if the field is already there, even at the developmental stage, we can assume it's already there. Even the stem cell doesn't have to even get it from the cells, because it already knows. But here we don't go that far. We say already the system is existing, stem cell gets the information, put it there, and then when there's a damage, if there's a huge change in the huge outer periphery damage, it extracts this information. So stem cell keeps the entropy and then minimum information, not a lot, basic information, in this case the radius, right? So we then extend, because we want to create a new organism, not just a circular. Circular is a very simple geometry. So then we came up with self-repair triangular tissue computer with pattern memory. So here another tissue, it's like a head tissue, like a head. There's the nose, there's the mouth there, and the body on that side, right? So it has corner cells, the border cells, and the interior cells. They have 4 neighbors, 3 neighbors, 2 neighbors, and these are the rules, as I said before. And now we also put an information field into that. Now it has 4 segments that the stem cell would monitor, not 12. Like before, we realized that we don't need 12. Actually, 4 is enough. It's very sensitive. So and it's also kind of a pragmatic. Not to have, we can have million if you want, but we said 4. 1, 2, 3, 4 segments. So this information field would have this depth, the height, and the aspect ratio AR is the height versus depth and number of corners. Actually should be 3, not 4. The mistake here, but anyway, this kind of minimum pattern. Okay? However, it's important to remember that this is only accessed in the extreme emergency cases. For example, like when you have an engineer design the building, and then part of the building collapses, and you can get the pattern information from the ground, from what's remaining most of the time. However, if certainly the outer perimeter is gone, then you have to look at the design This is the because I'm an engineer by training, so this is a very engineering kind of effort with the philosophical underpinning as well. So anyway, now this also has a similar sort of idea as before. It's a computing system now for maintaining the shape of a triangular tissue. I can show you how even that works. So this is a triangular tissue, and this is this part damage here. So one case of damage, I'm doing two damage cases, partial and large scale. So this is the partial damage. This is a large scale. There's only stem cell and a little part is remaining, right? So let's look at the first one. Here's a normal tissue, and this part is gone. This damage. Now you know if the stem cell is there, it knows that where this knows that damage is some in these regions, segments 2 and 3, for example, and then it calls the tissue. Tissue finds out the border, and the stem cell goes and then repairs it. You can see it doesn't need any information from the information field because it knows through the neighbors, the border cells say, I need two neighbors, that kind of stuff. And then ultimately it ends up meeting at this point. So if you look at the entropy, this is the original entropy of the 4 segments. 1, 2, 3, 4. After the damage here, and these segments are the segments here, entropy has changed. So, and then as the repair goes on, entropy reaches back to its original level, and stem cell is happy, and the process goes on. And if you look at the this other damage, oops. Other damage, it's a much more challenging. It doesn't have, so it has outer perimeter damage as you see at the bottom. So it has to tap into the information field to get this broad information, minimum pattern information. So here's the original entropy, and this is all parts have received damage. So entropy has changed, right? So now the stem cell gets the information from the information field and it rebuilds. Now here's real re-engineering going on with the information that it extracts from the field. So you can see slowly, you can see the shape is still like a triangle. It immediately finds a triangular shape, like the head. And then it just expands the triangular shape over and over until it reaches the pattern that it found in the field. So it reveals itself in that way. Right? So we did the same for self-repair triangular tissue model with pattern memory. I don't, same idea, so I don't want to go through it. It has 4 segments, interior, corner, and border cells, and this system. Now it's itself is a separate, all these tissues are separate tissue living computing systems, right? So now we kind of create a self-regenerating organism together as a living computer from individual tissue models. So now we have 3 tissues and a stem cell network. Why we call this? So these are the 3 tissues, 2 triangular tissues, and the body tissues. Now we are made to order and put them back together. Now we have 3 things, but there's no communication between the tissues yet. So we created a stem cell network, right? Stem cell network is more like overarching driver of this whole system because stem cell drives the regeneration. So now we have a stem cell network. It captures all the minimum pattern information of the tissues and then put it in the information field. And if you look at the stem cell network, it's these are 3 stem cells. You have 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3. 3 stem cell networks, and they communicate with each other just to know that I'm here, right? 1 meaning the head, 2 means the body, 3 means the tail, and 1 sends 1, 3 sends 3. That way, the respective tissue cells know who is there, who is not, kind of idea. So this is again a little dynamical system of neurons, the linear neural system, and each individual processes information in this way. It takes 2 information because it has only 2 neighbors. Whichever way you look at it, it receives information from 2 other neurons and process information in a linear way and produce an output. I'll show you right next what that output is. But basically, now we have conceptualized a stem cell network for regenerating missing stem cells, and that also helps us to large-scale recovery. That means whole tissues can be recovered, not just a partial recovery. The whole tissues can be missing tissues can be found and repaired. So, stem cell network identify missing stem cells. A lot of stuff going on here, but just ignore these top parts here. Basically, it says these are the computing happening in the 3 stem cells. The first one, for example, head stem cell says it receives information from the body cell and the tail cell. That means 3 and 2. It comes 2 means the middle one, 3 means the tail. If it receives 5, it's normal. Everything else, it says that if it's 0, that means the body and tail are gone. If it's only received 2, the tail is gone. If it receives only 3, the body is gone. There's a kind of indication of not just something is missing, but which one is missing can also be said. And the same can be said about the body and tail, so I don't want to go through it. But idea is still the same. This one would have, if everything is good, it's 4. Everything, otherwise, you have various decisions to make. And if it's a tail, everything is good, it's 3. If it's 1 and 2, something is missing. So it knows exactly what is missing. So now we have a whole organism self-regeneration, living computing system here. So it's an intelligent dynamical system that achieves complete regeneration through 2 levels of collective operation of the tissue and the stem cell models, right? So I put the whole thing together in here. Basically, there's a lot of wording here, but it's a simple. The blue region is the representation of all the tissue cells, tissue models, and the outer region is the stem cell network. All right. So when suppose all possible damage things cases are here. One is that there's only local tissue damage. The other is stem cell and local tissue damage. Other is stem cell missing and the whole tissue is missing, whole body parts, complete parts are missing. These are the only 3 damages that can be there. So what happens? If you have so the system works this way. Level 1 is a self-repair system for tissue damage with no stem cell damage. Top one is the self-repair system for stem cell and tissue damage, large-scale tissue damage. If there's only tissue damage, local tissue damage, only this blue part is activated. So system monitors, the stem cell monitors, if there's a problem, it detects the region which, where my children are missing, and it talks to the tissue cell, which is the auto-associative neural network, like I showed you, and it gets activated, finds the damage region, damage border, stem cell moves there and regenerates it. But if there's stem cell damage, it activates, okay, it knows immediately, it senses and detects the missing stem. It knows exactly which one is missing. It replaces that missing stem cell and then see, is it a partial tissue damage like here, or is a whole tissue missing? If it's partial tissue damage, then again, it talks to the tissue to find out the damaged border and it regenerates. If the whole tissue is damaged, there's no tissue to talk to. Therefore, it gets the information from the field and rebuild from scratch that tissue. So a couple of examples here. So the first is how to implement the regeneration framework. So this one is, you can see the worm here. It's a very idealized form of a worm. We have a head, body, and the tail, like I said. So it used to have 3 stem cells, but now maybe somebody ate this part. The stem cell and little bit of tissue is gone. So now, this is it's a challenge for this. This is the challenge we pose to our system. So interior damage to the worm removes a fragment of tissue along with the stem cell, leaving 2 damaged parts. So there are 2 remodeling tasks, as you can see. One is that it has to regrow a stem cell and regenerate this missing part, like a wound healing, right? But this one is much more challenging. It has to grow a whole organism from this tiny bit, right? So we are going to look at these 2 aspects. So first is the easier one, the organism with missing cell restores the original form. So process of regeneration of missing interior tissue. What happens? So we start with this problem. And so what the first thing it does is the stem cell network gets activated because one stem cell is missing. And the network now makes a new stem cell. And these things can happen in reality. And now it's there. Then the tissue is, we know it's a partial tissue damage because still the body tissue is there. Therefore, it activates the tissue model to find the damaged region, and then it's very easy to regenerate because it's bounded now, and it doesn't even think about about the pattern. It just keeps doing it, and now we have the original system. And now the big one is the small tissue fragment, how it regenerates when it's left with only one cell in the middle, right? So immediately again the stem cell network is activated and it knows which ones are missing, and then the 3 cells are generated, made, and now it has to the outer perimeter damage. It taps into the information field and does a kind of a remodeling of the whole form from sort of scratch, but it does in a way that it starts with a small worm, and then the small worm grow and make the bigger worm, and so on. So it's like a proportional throughout the concurrent regeneration of head, body, and tail at the same time, and then it regenerates. So we did so many different, extremely challenging and simple, and sort of a middle of the field experiment, a middle of the complexity experiment, and they all were very successful. So coming back to the end of my talk, we propose the self-regeneration framework treating organisms as living computers. And this is the first time this kind of concept has been proposed. So it opens lots of avenues to think about ourselves. I was at the beginning, I asked, does the worm know that it regenerates? So these are autonomous processes. We don't know how our food get digested. We hardly know. We only scratch the surface. Scientists are just, like I said, Eastern philosophies have come up with some solutions, some sort of a understanding of these, and I brought some of these into this discussion today. And the science is only catching up, but we're scratching the surface. So it's an autonomous thing. But we know from the small single living beings, and I showed you some examples that a lot of things happen as living computers. So our framework mimics some of the main features of planarian regeneration, including regeneration of the whole pattern from any tiny fragment, and complete and accurate regeneration from minor to severe damages, incurring loss of all body parts, head, body, or tail. So that means it's kind of there's immortality. So this is called body-wide immortality. So we create a synthetic worm habit, body-wide immortality. The real worm would, die in 1500 years because of the corruption, but this computer worm will go on forever. But the proposed framework is robust, versatile, and flexible, with complete regeneration ability achieved with minimum computation. I say minimum computation because there's only only local computation in the tissue and the entropy at the stem cell level. And the model can provide insight into self-recognizing, self-organizing, self-stabilizing communities that are intelligent decision-making systems. The conceptual and algorithm ideas of the framework can provide strategies for advancing regenerative medicine. At the beginning, I said there's a health implication, so it can be used for trauma, injury, birth defects, organ regeneration, cancer, to cure or even reduce or somehow impact them, as well as nature-inspired self-repair robots. In terms of regeneration medicine, this is in a small extent, this cell regeneration is happening, but still we don't know how to get the shapes, right? And some work is happening on various organisms to get these shapes, but it's where we have early steps of this field. The future is very, very promising. So this kind of work would kind of push this, frontier into unknown, uncharted territories. So actually, we extended this framework, and we are at this point, journal manuscript is in review by Science Robotics. It's called here. The difference is that we have a comprehensive computation dynamic framework for autonomous regeneration of not only form but also function. In this seminar, I only talk about form. That means the geometric shape. But in this work, we extend the framework to function, in particular the level of bioelectricity, because bioelectricity drives a lot of things in our body. So if you see the colors, I didn't use these colors before. These colors show the level of bioelectricity in the animal's head had a higher bioelectricity than the tail, for example. And in this case, this is the tissue. This is now we have a large stem cell network, not just 3 cells, but this has about 500 or 200 cells. The stem cell network is very large. And we also added another layer on top of that, a more even aggregated layer that watch over the bioelectricity side of things and regenerate bioelectricity in the process as well. So, that's, so our work has extended. I only presented the first papers. I showed you its content. So thank you very much. I write on